السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. ضيوفنا الكرام، نرحب بكم في اليوم السابع أو السادس عذرا من أسبوع العمارة العربي الرابع في محاضرتنا الأولى مع الدكتور محمد بلبيسي في محاضرة بعنوان New Paradigms in Architectural Representation. Thank you, Dr. Muhammad, for joining us today, and we hand over the mic to you.
Okay, good. I'm so glad. Thank you so much for the invitation. I feel genuinely very privileged to be part of this. And thank you so much for organizing it. I know it's a lot of work. Two things before I start. I was told to keep it to 1/2 an hour, which is really very short. However, I'm going to do my best to do it. And the first one is I was hoping that we would meet under better circumstances. It seems that the whole world is just burning. It's really ridiculous, but you know, what can you do? And the second part, and I'd like to offer my sincere apologies for not speaking Arabic. I do understand Arabic. However, my command on the technical terms are rather pathetic. So اعتذروا. If I speak Arabic, probably I would sound not very well. So anyway, the lecture, the topic is actually my lifelong quest about illustration and about representation when it comes to architecture. I am personally an architect. I'm also an educator. I'm also a painter. So, you know, I use this stuff. And what it is that before we start is I would like to be a little bit more scholarly and just like started by actually like Viollet-le-Duc. There is always the start of any argument should be with definitions. So the first definition is about illustration, and it's the pictorial elucidation of any subject. And the second one, whenever I'm talking about representation, it's the action or fact of expressing or denoting symbolically. So the two are not the same. And many times, like, you know, you hear them being exchanged as if they are the same, but they are not. And this particular topic is very dear to me, and that's because lately there had been some kind of a schism, a divide, so to speak, between architectural drawings that are being done by the academy, meaning the universities and the students and the faculty, and the other one that's being done by the practitioners, who always favored actually contour drawings meaning floor plans, elevations, and linear perspective. And the advent in computers and computer technology had made it even worse, and that's because I think AutoCAD probably started during the early 80s, maybe the late 70s, you know, full-fledged computer program is actually, it took what the architects favor and gave it to them times 300. So all of a sudden, architects, even who are dabbling in technology, they wanted to actually just use contour drawings to do things. And what it is that all of a sudden, we are actually just seeing the fact that academics and academicians are actually just doing what I call illuminations, in which they are just the hybrid drawings that go in between architecture and other things in architecture. They just call them painter. They look like paintings, and artificial intelligence is actually making it worse. It's just like there's no beginning to it. There is no end. The students love it. The practitioners don't like it. And what makes things even worse is that actually the latest software about representation and illustration, which is things like Enscape and so on and so forth, is seriously, it's just like extremely realistic. It reminds me what in the movie Blade Runner by Ridley Scott is whenever Mr. Tyrell, he said, it's more real than real. It's unbelievable. So you're looking at it and it's hyper real. The problem is that architects, whenever they are dealing with clients, and they are actually prophetic. This means that, okay, Mr. Client, you just give me the money and give me the freedom. And then I will do my best to give you what you see in this photograph. It's really fascinating. So the more realistic that you show the client, I think the client is going to probably trust you more and be able to tell you, yeah, sure, this is exactly what I want. However, for some bizarre reason, academics don't like it. And this is where I come to play. So what it is that in my scholarship is I dabble into three things that are critical to architectural illustration and representation. So usually at universities is that they tend to talk about critiquing design. But maybe they can just say that this is not actually just illustrative enough. Maybe this is not communicative enough. But however, this is about critiquing the drawing, being critical, and providing some framework about what works and what does not work, and why is it working, why is it not working. It's only fair. And I depend on three things. The first one is that the issue of authorship and the authenticity. This is number one, and I would explain them afterwards. And the second one is about truthfulness in the illustration. And the third one is intent of purpose. And allow me to explain what I mean by these. And I'm going to just read so that I will be very precise. So what happens? The three terms tend to be separate, yet they relate to each other and exist within the architectural drawing image as its sole locus. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt, but there seems to be an issue with with your voice.
Oh.
It's a bit low for the attendees. We've received a lot of inquiries.
Yeah.
If you don't mind either adjusting the microphone or raising your voice just a little bit when you're talking.
Sure. Is it better now?
It's a bit better, yes.
Okay, I'll start screaming. I might sound like I am sick, but that's okay. It cannot be more Arabic than this. So it's good.
All right, well.
Again, let me just go through it. I apologize. Is that to explain these terms, the first is the issue of authorship, and it addresses the source of the image, albeit the computer, which is the machine, or the architect, which is the human. The second is the truthfulness of the image as it relates to the objectivity or subjectivity of the subject matter. And the last is the intent of purpose, which deals with the intent as it relates to the purpose behind the architectural illustration. So it's really fascinating. So before I start talking about this, and I'm doing my best to go as quickly as possible, however, what happens is that architectural illustration was painterly for the longest time. Actually, architects, designers, if they existed even at that time, what they do is they usually paint pictures. And then what happens is that they get turned into architecture. One thing happened in history, and it changed things forever, which is really bizarre. In the 15th century, and his name is Filippo Brunelleschi. Oh my God, an awesome person. Debatable. He actually invented perspective. And my friends, please make sure that you understand he did not discover it. You don't discover perspective. This is wrong. I've heard many faculties say discover. You discover that the earth is round, but you actually invent linear perspective. And what he did is that because of him being very, very, very succinct and very much in touch of what is going on in the field of optics, especially that of the great Muslim scientist Al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham, and here they call him Al-Hazan in Latin. And what he did is that he discovered, he invented a way in which you would actually draw 3D, and it appears as if you are looking at it. It was brilliant. And all of a sudden, that was the beginning of linear perspective. Architects loved it so much, and they started actually generating linear perspectives until now. It's the weirdest thing. Even AutoCAD, whenever it actually draws perspective, linear perspective, meaning that it's made out of line, not Inkscape, what happens, it actually uses mathematics so that it'll be able to generate it into line. Architects, of course, loved it so much, and the reason behind it, and that's because it is very efficient and it's very quick. Architects just love contour drawings. There is no such thing. In real life, lines don't exist. There are differences in value, and I would have loved to actually have invented this particular method for drawing, and that's because I can make a fortune. It is actually abstracting two adjacent values that are different with a line. It cannot be more abstract than this. It's brilliant. And it is extremely, extremely quick. And what happens all of a sudden, the gamut of what it's capable of communicating is actually very limited. It can only communicate edges. It communicates extents, beginnings and ends. It's really bizarre, but however, qualitatively, It does not do this. It depends on the imagination of the person looking at it. And let's just like face it, probably 3/4 of us actually unimaginative. You just need more information so that you can process it. It's really bizarre. And what made things actually worse is the Industrial Revolution. In my opinion, the roots of all evil. And what happens is that they actually wanted, at that time, if you're just going to mention like Great Britain, what they did is they actually had got a lot of products that needed to be sold. For example, trains, for example, machines, and these are actually big pieces. You cannot actually transport it in totality. So it needs to go in bits and pieces, and these bits and pieces need to be put together by people who are not necessarily well versed in the English language. They will actually suffer whenever they're reading the manuals. So all of a sudden, we started to actually draw things in extreme simplistic way so that we would understand it and putting it together. And the rest of history, it seems the whole world discovered contour drawings and started using it. It went on. Very nice. So that aside, all of a sudden is that the students and academics, and they decided to actually start dabbling into something different, which I call Illuminations and other papers that I've written. This means that it is not just a drawing, it is actually a pictorial that carries more, and it actually induces what Gibson calls the theory of it will come back to me, it's old age. What happens? Affordances, the theory of affordances, which means, for example, if you find a ledge that is 18 inches high, what you need to do is probably just sit on it. You don't eat it. These things are instinctual to people. They actually do it this way. And it's the same thing. These particular images actually induces affordances. And these affordances imagine you to, or forces you to imagine how it feels like to be there, and puts you in a framework that is mentally, emotionally, so that you will be receptive to what the designer is trying to actually offer you in terms of a proposal. So, having said that, let me go back to the issue of authorship. What happens is a deeper investigation into this topic actually led me to this great philosopher, and he is actually an Arab. His name is Ali Harb. Ali Harb is a philosopher. He is French of Lebanese origin. And he actually took off where Jacques Derrida, the father of deconstruction, had left. Derrida, he died, unfortunately. But what happens is that he became a star. He came up with a book called Deconstruction. Dissemination is another book. It's just completely complex topics in which he investigates actually the mental condition of the writer to assess the validity of what he or she are saying in their book. And I thought to myself, this will be amazing, is that why are we always taking the pictures or the images as being truthful? Who said that? Well, it is important for architecture, and that's because a lot of things depend on it. It is a proposal. A lot of money is involved, a lot of hopes. So this means that you have to be extremely truthful in this. But what happens is that, as I said, Jacques Derrida became very famous, very political in a way, and Ali Harb decided that, no, I'm going to actually take that a little bit more. Ali Harb, he wrote books, for example, it's critiquing reality, but plus other things. It's really amazing. He's an amazing author. But what he thinks is that he thinks and he proposes actually an amazing way of reading the text two ways. One, while you are believing in it, and the second one, while actually refuting everything inside it, so that it would be actually leading you towards some kind of a truth that's probably somewhere in between. It's fascinating. Yeah. Professor Harb, for example, he believes in the supremacy of intent and how this intent may be investigated systematically as a tool to achieve certainty. He also believes that the text is the mirror of emotions. Text itself is not emotional, but it is the absolute carrier of such human traits. He adds that deciphering the emotional status of the writer is fundamental to determining the text through authorship. His books about criticism and philosophy cast doubt on the true nature of the text and its truthfulness. He insists that any reading of any text is not sufficient for true comprehension. It's amazing. And I took that in a good way for you to actually look at images that are produced for architects so that you can actually use similar traits, similar techniques for reading it. Did you notice what I'm saying? Reading the images. It's not just looking at it, it's processing it and reprocessing it, believing it and not believing it, so that eventually it would force you to reach certainty. The other part is about truthfulness. And let me tell you about this. Truthfulness of the image or the text is the relative quality of the work as a subset of being true to life. Another way of explaining such concept would be the degree of representation of the subject matter as free from associative or absolute pretenses. This means it is not relating to anything else in a way. It's being truthful. What the architect is actually representing or communicating is very, very close to the truth. It's not padded. The role behind it is to give you as much as possible as the truth without hype, without lying, so to speak, in a way. This is a little bit amazing, and that's because I actually looked at the work of Hagberg in his book Art as Language, and I'm not too sure I believe in what he says, and that's because he thinks that the text is the same thing as an image. It could be read exactly the same thing. So you've got Harb, he says, don't believe the text. This means, according to me, don't believe the image. And then Hagberg, he goes, absolutely. You read it exactly like the text, and I disagree. And many people's like, oh, art is just text. It's the same thing. Text, my dear friends, is sequential. You read it from beginning and you end. You can't read the paragraph backwards or in the middle. It won't make sense. It's sequential. It's very different than making an image. An image I cannot control as much as I can. I cannot really control where do you start reading it. I usually just show it to you. And we, as architects, I remember vividly when I was a student, the faculty would say, in the Western world, you actually start with the top left and you end with the bottom right. But however, if you go to the East, people actually read from left to right. This means you start from the top right and you end at the bottom left. This is hogwash. Not at all. Your eye's gonna go everywhere. So all of a sudden, comparing this to a text is actually counterproductive. It does not work like this. It is not sequential, which is actually amazing. And the third, which is the intent and purpose, that actually comes across from listening to the architect. This means, according to me, you cannot actually present your work remotely just like and depend on the person just to look at the image. Is that the author needs to be actually present somehow, in which you will actually explain and you will be able to guide how this is being read by the viewer. And the viewer needs to read it very differently. It's by looking at it and believing in it and looking at it again and not believing in it. Let me show you some illustrations. Maybe it would make sense. If I may share. Okay, again, this right here is the first image, and it is actually an illumination. You can call it, I mean, you can always just say it looks like a drawing, but however, it's actually not a contour drawing. It is actually not necessarily an image per se. It has got some section-like qualities. It has got plan-like, right? It is actually something that you would show so that you can evoke and you can produce some kind of an emotional response so that the client would be able to be put in a particular emotional state to accept what the architect is actually presenting. This is the death mask of Brunelleschi. It's fascinating. It's an amazing, brilliant man, and it's debatable if he actually invented perspective. Many suggest it's Alberti actually wrote about perspective, and Brunelleschi, he demonstrated perspective. And these are some of these manuals actually that were produced so that you can actually just put bits and pieces together. Again, if you notice that it does not have any words, it does have numbers, and it depends on you actually just really devoiding yourself from any emotional content and just like really focus on how these bits and pieces fit together. And this is what I am actually alluding as being not necessarily good. It's fantastic. This is actually the work of Hassan Fathi. And this actually is the roots of why the architects all of a sudden started to pay attention and produce illuminations. Please allow me to explain. What happens usually is that here is a very, very, very great professor at Columbia. His name is Kenneth Frampton, and he actually he's the person who coined the term critical regionalism. And what he did during the 80s, and what he did is that it was just a simple essay, but many people actually just like read it, especially academics and architecture. And all of a sudden he says that, it's not just necessarily just like modernism with its infatuation with contour drawings, albeit floor plans, elevations, and just banal sections. It's just, there is more. And he showed examples of architects who are actually working and practicing successfully, not in the Western realm. And he produced, for example, he mentioned Hassan Fathi, he Alvaro Siza, he mentioned Tadao Ando, Jeffrey Bowa. It's amazing. Balkrishna Doshi from India. And all of them, they actually produced different architecture, successful architecture. But what I did is actually I looked at their representation. Fascinating. And in case you didn't know, actually Hassan Fathi, he started as a modernist, believe it or not. He produced actually some seriously hideous boxes with glass, in which it could be air conditioned and you can just put it anywhere, it should be okay. And all of a sudden, thank God that he saw the way, and all of a sudden he's actually, you know what? We have got an architectural tradition, and we've got actually a tradition of representing things. And this goes back all the way to ancient manuscripts in which, for example, I'm pretty sure you've seen it. It's, for example, the site plan for Mecca, and it shows Mecca in plan and elevation at the same time. And what is around it is actually completely flattened. It shows the location, it shows the indication, but however, they are not actually contour drawings. And the same thing that he's using right here. This is, I think it's the Rizk house. And you can tell that it is actually a plan. It's a site plan with some elevations, and then some design for a courtyard that has got a pool and has got several trees. And there is some kind of like a peasant walking with the animals. And if anything, he is just putting you in a mindset, in an emotional status, so that you will accept the fact that he is giving you something that is going to be on the regional realm of architecture, if that makes sense. It's really fascinating. He can always just like present it as being floor plans, elevations, sections, but however, let's just face it, and I hope I'm not insulting architects, but the latest statistics that comes from AIA says like 75%, 70 to 75% of architects don't understand 3D very well. It's normal. It's not like they're bad. It's normal. It's just human beings tend to be 2D. It's really bizarre. But this is what it's fascinating about it. This is what happened in the 80s. And many people thought this is a thing. This is actually the work of, I'm not going to mention it, you might actually know this particular person, in which this is actually generated by architecture. It's very quick. It's what we call extraction, is that whenever you actually input the information numerically, it actually spits out the 3D. And this is not even 3D. It has got some 3D qualities about it, but however, it is very banal. And this is what I am against. This is whenever actually the client is put in an emotional status of comfort. It is an emotional status of being aggressively very uncomfortable. And it's odd. It's horrible. Like if somebody actually is showing that to me as a client, I was like, I refuse to take it. This is actually the worst thing ever. Not necessarily about design. It's just so banal as a representation. It's sad. And this is what I am showing, and this is what is happening in academia at this moment. This is actually a proposal. If you just look at it, and this is actually by it's actually a new, it's an ocean house by Dmitry Donsakov. It's fascinating, but all of everything about it is actually artificial. But however, it is designed to put you in a mental status in which you will be more receptive to accepting the design proposal. It's fascinating. And in case you are wondering about what we call extractions, these are actually extractions. This is whenever we are just like using some amazing software such as like Rhino. I don't know if it's popular in the Middle East, but is after you are actually done with like 3D modeling your subject or your object, is you can actually use a clipping pane, and this clipping pane comes and then it also unfolds what you have to look at. And all of a sudden you would end up with something like this, which is almost impossible to draw. It's very hard to draw and it's very hard to communicate. But all of a sudden, these tools that are actually embracing the illumination part of the illustration is making the work more acceptable, more comprehensible. However, I really don't know. For some bizarre reason, it seems that the architects, the practicing architects, they are really against it. Which brings me to almost half an hour. And it's really up to the moderator to open this for questions, and I'll be more than happy to answer.
We thank you, Dr. Muhammad, for this insightful lecture. And we are actually, in fact, going to move to the Q&A session, if we may.
Absolutely.
So first question that we've received is, what are the key emerging paradigms in the architectural representation, and how are they different from traditional approaches?
That's a very good question. What it is that until now, is that even if the architect is on the forefront of what is being actually produced in terms of representation and illustration, they tend to actually document their project by using contour drawings, which is the typical floor plan, the typical elevation, and that because it is communicating, again, extents, dimensions, ends, and beginnings, edges. This is what it's about. But is there a better way to do it? Oh, absolutely. And I think we have started to do this, but however, I really doubt about its effectiveness. And that's because sometimes actually by using BIM, which is like a great software so that you can actually document your project, but however, it is definitely not a design tool. But what it is that I can always just take the 3D model and I can just give it to the contractor to build it. However, is it actually endowed with what we call the affordances or the emotional aspects of what the architect wants you to actually experience, which we do whenever we actually live and dwell in architecture? It does not. Absolutely not. So you begin to wonder about like what's going to be the outcome. And you know, the outcome could be something that's simpler than we thought. For the longest time is that if you notice that the builder or the contractor was actually an amazing person who are well versed in architecture. So the architects did not have to produce a lot of drawings for anything to be built. Unbelievable. I mean, many things are very usually there, but things are different. Many of you is like, oh, now things are different. Architects are in offices, the contractor is somewhere else. But however, there is actually a way, and it has got something to do with actually the architects is that bringing themselves a little bit down from their ivory towers, and then the contractors being educated more about architecture and the importance of good design in space. Once that happens, oh my God, it's amazing. We are in paradise. All of a sudden, things are amazing. Things are working. But right now, no, not at all. It seems that the academics are in this particular realm when it comes to architectural representation and illustration, and the practicing architects are somewhere else. And there is nothing in between, which is really sad in my opinion. I hope I answered it.
Most definitely, Dr. Muhammad. That brings us to another question from Rajud Al-Hussein, which is that gray area that you were talking about between the practice and the illustration. How could an architect or one adapt those new design representations and styles into their design process. What do you believe are the main components that would enable architects to link those together?
You know, again, is that we inherited an old system of representation and illustration, and it's hard to part with it. It's really amazing. Even some of the most avant-garde architects are still always retreating back because there is a level of comfort associated with just doing what we're used to, which is fantastic. But what it is that change, and I believe in it, is actually evolutionary, not revolutionary. I think step by step, is being able to produce actually these, again, illuminations, which are actually illustrations endowed with emotionality, and being able to actually just share it with the contractor prior to actually doing the project, or even having the client being involved. It just requires a lot of courage and trust in the fact that they are getting it and they're working towards it. Maybe I am a romantic fool, but however, seriously, is that our best architecture, in my opinion, had happened previously without the use of CAD and BIM. So seriously, and it's all of a sudden is that changing the way we do things so that we can be more efficient, so that we can work faster, so that we can work better. And the question is about value. Did it produce better architecture? That's up to you, actually. You know, make sure you don't ask me this question. God knows I have an opinion. So you have to be careful.
Well, we're not going to ask you that question specifically,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Mohammed, but there's one that is within the parameter. Are there any ethical and social implications to consider when adapting new paradigms, architectural representation?
That's a very good question. This is an awesome question. And let me just tell you, we live now in a litigious society. What happens is that if you start communicating your project, let me get back a bit. Let me just tell you, what architects are actually fortune tellers. Usually says, you know, give me the money, give me the resources, and I'm going to give you something that looks like this. Did you notice? Looks, it means visually. And it's up to the client to say, you know, I think I could feel comfortable there. Or maybe you would just look at it, and many times, how many of us says, oh, yes, I like what you did with the bathroom, says, no, this is the kitchen. Clients don't necessarily understand drawings. Contour drawings are not natural. Everything's flattened. Seriously, my friends, if you see floor plans, whenever you actually go to a piece of architecture, you need to seek medical help. It's a glorified diagram. What it is the same thing for elevation. Diminution and foreshortening is part of our visual repertoire. Things are not all to scale. It's the weirdest thing. So what happens? All of a sudden, I am so afraid that once actually something gets built and the client is not necessarily what she understood, we might get in trouble. I paid millions for this, and this is not what you showed me. Oh my God, that could be very problematic. So I really don't know. Until now, luckily, there is some faith. It's like, oh, I got 80% of what I looked at. That's not bad. But however, I think whenever we are actually starting to go more and more into this societal bizarreness, you know, suing each other and so on and so forth, because this is not what you showed me. This is not what we might get in trouble. Really, it's just I think it's a matter of time before architects start to get in trouble for like uh, producing drawings, and then what is being built is like different, completely different.
Dr. Muhammad, on the idea of having a product that doesn't necessarily look like the drawings, what are the challenges and limitations that are associated with those innovative representation methods? And in your opinion, what are the approaches or the approaches that architects can take in order to overcome those challenges?
Again, it's the three things that I talked about, and it sounds like it's a formula. You know, use the three things and you can just win like Chevy Corvette. It doesn't work like this. And what it is actually being truthful. That's very important. Is the fact that you did the drawings as the designer. And I think some of you going, oh, blasted, I usually send my drawings to China and they come back the next day. I didn't even do them. So that is problematic. Number two, the second one, which is actually truthfulness. So you did not author them. And the truthfulness, well, I'm not too sure. And that's because you are producing something. It's not necessarily what's going to get built. So how much is that? Is it absolute? No, of course not. It's very relative. So the idea that if I get about 80% truth out of it, that's not bad. What's not? Very fantastic. And the last one is the intent of purpose. That's between you and yourself, which is amazing. Is that what are you going into this project for? Is to help create space, is to help the client, or to make money? That's a very good question. These three actually just come into play whenever you are practicing architecture, and most importantly, whenever you are communicating it. Because no matter how good you are, let me just tell you about how important it is in terms of illustration and representation. No matter what a great designer you are, if you can't communicate well, graphically, it's very bad. You can always talk about it, but however, I am not joking. People tend to conceive space probably a little bit by imagination, by using their brain, and a lot of it as actually visually, optically. They have to actually see it. This is how they work. I mean, the other senses comes into play, but amazingly enough, architecture is usually, for millennia, had been communicated optically. I hope I answered it.
Most definitely, Dr. Muhammad. Another question. We cannot talk about visual representation without touching upon the elephant in the room, which is VR and AR, visual reality, augmented reality. In your opinion, Dr. Muhammad, how did those techniques or approaches transform the architectural representation methods in our current day?
Actually, it's very good. The kind that I have experienced so far, I hate to say this, but they make me sick and I throw up. I mean, it's just like physically, whenever I just put this, unless it gets more comfortable and I don't have to actually get dressed like an astronaut, I think it's okay. I think it's really great because it's a step forward in which it becomes more experiential. But however, so far, what I've seen is not impressive. And that's because somehow it is just, yikes, it's hard to explain. Maybe physically I am wired so that I won't work with virtual reality, but I think it's a good way to there, and we are very far from actually just making it so mainstream in which like you can just perceive it as if you are inside it without having to have special software and special goggles and so on and so forth. Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, I wish I have an answer. I think it's a good step. It's a very good step, but so far, no.
Dr. Muhammad, we thank you for your time with us today, and we hope to collaborate with you more in the future, inshallah.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank
I
you.
enjoyed it. And feel free to contact me. I'm available everywhere, email, social media. It's my job is to actually just instigate investigation and discussion. This is very important for us. And it makes me very, very happy to see an amazing organization like yours reaching out to the new amazing designers that are coming from the Arab world. It's so impressive. The work that I've seen is very, 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 very impressive, and I can't wait to see more and better. I just hope that our languages would get closer to each other. Maybe, I don't know how that's going to work out. Maybe that's another paper. That's fantastic. It's good to see you.
Good to see you too, Dr. Muhammad.
Bye.
Thank you again.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Bye.